Hey guys, it's Autorunner. I'm recording again. So for this video, this is less me ranting slightly angry and more or less me talking about, well, for one, comics to start with, and for two, two titles in particular. And it's an interesting thing because I honestly think the only way you're gonna have a good superhero is if you have a better supervillain. So who has the best rogues gallery? And I think most people, most comic fans agree. It's gotta be one of the two. Spider-Man's or Batman's. Because while Superman, for example, has like Lex Luthor, Parasite, and Brainiac, Darkseid, here's the catch. Superman doesn't sell solo comics usually. That's fine, that's just a problem with the character, but it's because he doesn't have that many rogues. I mean, he has Bizarro. Okay, that's another one. But for the most part, a character like Superman really runs off of JLA. Because he's basically the leader of it. And he's what attracts a lot of fans of JLA to JLA with that. Whereas someone like Batman fucking sells so many solo comics, so many different titles, created all the Bat family. I mean, throughout the 2000s, like the mid to late 2000s to early 2010s, there was literally like fucking easily over 20 different Bat-related titles. Like Batgirl, or like Red Hood, or Nightwing, or any other one. And I think there's even one where it is all of them together anyway. So, obviously, then we talk about Spider-Man, who has the exact same effect as Batman. Just a little bit more lenient, kind of. But he kind of did the same thing anyway. I mean, let me name these alternate titles: Amazing Spider-Man, Superior Spider-Man, Ultimate Spider-Man, Sensational Spider-Man, Peter Parker Spider-Man. Let's think, Spectacular Spider-Man. And some of those even just sound like the cartoons, because two of those names are from the cartoons. But believe it or not, the cartoons' names are based off of different comic lines. So, okay, yeah, it's kind of funny when you put it in those terms, but like, the reason why I say, and keep in mind, Spider-Man also branches off with some of its characters, like Superior Spider-Man, who's obviously different than Peter, and then you got Venom, my favorite character, who has his own series, stuff like that, who branch off. Black Cat, I think, even did. But, point being, is because both rogues galleries have so many villains inside them, which is essential to a hero. Because if a hero fights one villain once, if you have only like 6 villains to choose from usually, and then just some random people who aren't even villains at the time, they're just like a guy who's never even named, and he's trying to create World War III or something. Usually that's more like 60s comics, but like, when you have such an expansive roster of villains to work with, you can actually leave some on the bench sometimes, waiting to use them for something bigger, or say they're in prison, and then still have plenty of fresh work to do with, and then bring those villains back. And then even have like a decent amount of those villains win sometimes, because you have to do that. Otherwise, the villains just feel pathetic. And then it feels improbable every victory that the hero wins. But like when the villain, or the villains, I should say, there's enough of them. When there are, you start to build a world. You build like 35% of your world, because 35% of your world should at least be focused on your villains. And, you know, just to name some examples between the two Rogues Gallery, you got on Spidey's side the whole Sinister Six, which goes, well, I mean, plenty of people have been in it, but that's a big thing. That's a group of villains of 6. And of those who have been in it, like, or not even been in it, but just to name some, like Doc Ock, like Electro, like Rhino, Venom, he's an anti-hero since the 90s, so I don't usually want to put him there, but he usually is anyway. Carnage, Shocker, Scorpion, Mysterio, Green Goblin, Hobgoblin, Lizard, Sandman, Vulture. Like, there's so many names I can actually list off that are still prominent too. And then on Batman's side, you have the exact same thing. The one everybody knows, Joker, Scarecrow, Harley Quinn, Mr. Freeze, Bane, Killer Croc, Penguin, Two-Face. Just, it goes on and on. Now, Batman's more unfamiliar with me typically, but just in general. And really, the argument comes down to, here's what it really comes down to. Or here's the criteria for judging it, I should say. Of the two Rogues Galleries, which villains are used the most and are the most lethal, so to speak, where they actually deal damage to the hero? Of the two, how well written are the villains? And that doesn't just have to go with the dialogue, or that doesn't just have to go with the plot, but their meaning, their the touch that they represent something. Of the two Rogues Galleries, which has a better theme? And of these 3 kind of guidelines, I do think that overall, from what Batman's Rogues Gallery's got to offer, it has a better theme, I will admit. And it does have some better meaning to it. So I think it does win 2 out of 3. Although, one of the points can be interspersed, but one thing that I think Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery does way better than Batman's is using them better. Because it kind of feels like, for most Batman stories, it always revolves around, like, the same 3. And it makes all the other villains feel just a little bit claustrophobic together. Just a little bit. And unused. Unfairly unused in some cases. So, like, and what I mean by that is, like, the main 3, I'd say, would be, like, well, Joker, obviously, is going to always be there, and he's probably the most cancerous of it, just because he takes so much of the stories. And yeah, you could say, well, Otto, shouldn't he be, if he's Batman's arch nemesis? And I say no, because it's a Rogues Gallery. There's not, the most emphasis is on the Joker, but not the most focus. And so, then you have the Riddler, who I guess is more surprising, but at the same time, he gets used so much. He is so well known. And it's okay that he's used a lot, but he's just slightly always attached, no matter what. And then Penguin, I would say, maybe not really. I guess more or less, it would come down to the main two, regardless, but the third is kind of indispensable, depending on the era, now that I think about it. Because at one point, it was the Penguin, really. And then, in another, you could say Bane, just as easily, but you see what I mean? Whereas, in Spidey's Rogues Gallery, he has so many to divert his time to. Even some of the more recent ones, like Mr. Negative, where it feels like each of the villains has some level of control. And it really feels like, okay, Green Goblin's going to have the Goblin Nation. Doc Ock is always going to usually be leading the Sinister Six. When it comes to symbiote related stuff, Venom is usually the prime candidate to talk about it anyway. But when it comes to using a villain in that regard for any of the symbiote stuff, you have Carnage to back it up, because Venom is an anti-hero now, and he has been for a long time. So, what I'm trying to say is, where I think Batman is strong enough with his Rogues Gallery that it's unique, and there's a really good theme of insanity that plays around that I love. I love when you get into themes of insanity. And they're also more well developed as those ideas, but I think when it comes to how well they're used, Spider-Man's, I just feel, is so much better. And, Rogues Galleries in general, I do think are... It depends, because it's tough to say, especially with characters who are team-based characters, right? Like all the X-Men, pretty much the Avengers, stuff like that. Then you can't really say Captain America's Rogues Gallery without at least a little bit acknowledging that most of his Rogues Gallery kind of comes from the Avengers stuff. I mean, sure, you could name off Red Skull, you could name off Baron Zemo, Arnim Zola, you could name off Winter Soldier, but at the end of the day, he's more likely to fight Thanos or Loki. Even though Thanos is in general an Avengers villain, so to speak, and Loki is more of a Thor/Avengers villain anyway. I mean, he's literally the first ever Avengers villain. The first ever issue had him as a villain. But that's why I think it's very, very tough for a character who has some team affiliation to really have a Rogues Gallery that's potent to just them. And that's what you need. A Rogues Gallery that's potent to a specific person. They should feel overwhelmed. They should feel outnumbered. Because then it feels like a threat. They should always be challenged. They shouldn't always win. They should always have a level of consequence that I think is necessary for a comic to be at least decent, is the villains. Because at the end of the day, the villains are killing the civilians, the villains are changing the plot, the villains move the plot. The villain's antagonist literally means one who brings change. They bring the change of the story. It's just the protagonist who is reacting to whatever it is. So when you have a lackluster Rogues Gallery, there's not much things you could do. or not many, I should say, because the stories you make are limited. Because of that, they're limited because they don't have enough change moving in that story. So really, this part of the video is just me ranting about the idea of a rogues gallery and why, when you compare Batman to Spider-Man and their rogues galleries, and most people guarantee it come down to that equation, Batman or Spider-Man. And mathematically, you can look at it, or just personally, you can look at it. But really, what I'm trying to say, for really all stories, all writers, any comic, that they can take the lesson from Batman and Spider-Man that they can use and incorporate themselves, is make a good rogues gallery. Don't just make 2 or 3 important ones and then have 2 or 3 minor ones. Have half as many important ones you want and as many minor ones as you want, because it's only going to make the story better. And that's what I'm trying to say with that statement, and why I try to bring up that dichotomy between the two comics as kind of important for the rest of any rogues gallery, because those are the 2 main examples I could bring up. So, yeah, this video has mostly just been me going off on a tangent, but I just find it kind of interesting to do, so let me know what you guys think, if anybody wants to comment.